Hello, everyone. My name is Kenneth Verbacher, and I'm the host of Baylor Athletics' first ever podcast, The Last Call. Today, I have with me Foster Nicholas. He's a sports writer for the Baylor Lariat, and he is also one of the hosts of the podcast, Don't Feed the Bears. Foster, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, of course, Ken. It's good to sit down and chat with you on the first podcast.
So, Foster, tell me, how did you get into sports writing?
Getting into sports writing was actually kind of a longer journey. I went into college really wanting to just stick to radio or stick to television, a space that I wanted to go into, either for play-by-play or natural just radio talk shows. And then I was given the opportunity to take a bigger step and write, and then I took that opportunity, and I don't like writing. And then I did it, and I loved it. I was shocked. So it's been a good change to do both and put my knowledge both on the paper, and then that helps me when I come and sit down and do a podcast of my own.
Well, I love to hear that. What's the day-to-day like as a sports writer?
I think I wake up in the morning, and of course, like everyone else, doesn't matter what you do, just check the phone, see if there's any news. And usually, here in Waco, let's be honest, there isn't that much, but there's still plenty to cover. So just going through, chatting with SIDs, the sports directors to make sure there's nothing big going on, see if they've got any story ideas too, and then chatting up with some players, writing a game story, and then turning that in. And deadline's pretty lenient, so it's easy to just keep going and file stuff on time.
So do you have any athletic events that you personally love covering? Anything that just resonates with you?
My favorite sport is baseball, and it always has been since I was a kid, just loving baseball and going to baseball. But through the experience, I've had the ability to cover a lot of events that usually I would have never thought I would enjoy, like golf and men's tennis, women's tennis. Being able to go to those, learn a new sport, and cover those. So I've found a nice appreciation for tennis, but baseball is still the number one.
What out of all the events you've ever covered, what has been some of the more memorable moments that you've gotten the opportunity to write for?
Well, just a couple of weeks ago, Ken, you were with me. We went down to Denver to cover some of the March Madness for Baylor basketball, and that was a lot of fun, being able to be there, be with some of the big wigs, kind of test our own knowledge, compare that, and do the same thing that a lot of professionals do. So it's good to have those experiences where you're sitting with guys who have been there and consistently performed. Like, they're not playing, but they still perform at the highest level. And it's interesting to see that, learn from them. And we had that opportunity in Denver, which was just absolutely mind-blowing.
It was great. So on that note of March Madness, the basketball season's now over. How do you feel about Baylor's performance this semester, and what direction do you think the program is going to take?
I think it's Baylor basketball, and we've seen Scott Drew progress this program from a cellar team and an afterthought to something that's now constantly having expectations to win a championship, which isn't fair, but it comes along with the job. So ultimately, falling out in the second round is disappointing, but if you look at all the good things, Baylor went through a whole lot of ups and downs throughout the entire season, starting off with losing streaks in conference play, then finding their groove. So I think the outlook for this team next season is still really good, but it's going to be new faces, and we've come to expect that now that this team and this program is one of the best in the country. You've got to change things up and progress every single year.
Oh yeah. We're losing a lot of great guys this semester, but hopefully it works out. So spring football. The Lariat's been able to cover a couple of their practices. How do you feel about spring football?
I'm pumped. I love football, and it's never been my primary sport, but I've found an appreciation for the way that the Baylor athletes hold themselves and the regime under Dave Aranda. I think this team, to just put out bluntly, they were extremely disappointing last year. It was not a season that anyone wanted to see, and of course, losing the coldest bowl game in Texas history was another experience that I will never forget. But I think just seeing that these guys are progressing, brand new looks, you still got that leadership aspect for this team on the defense and on the offense. But all eyes right now are on the running back room, which is clearly the biggest strength of this team, and the quarterback battle going on. And Ken, I know you've got some great shots of those guys, but it's been cool to watch this process unfold for the second straight year. There's some controversy going around about who should start.
So, Foster, tell me a little bit more about your podcast. Like, how did you get into it? How did you get into it?
How did I get into it? Ooh, that's a good question. I'm in my sophomore year, and the freshman year I came in, I'd talked to our media director Bruce Geetson about joining on and starting the podcast right when I entered. And then there was still some turnover from COVID, so we weren't able to start it up that first semester. And then I got the job again second semester freshman year to host the podcast, and still we weren't able to really turn the wheels and pump something out. So another semester went by, and this summer I worked hand in hand with him trying to figure out what the best way to run the podcast is and how we want to do it. So we decided that myself and my other co-host, Harper Mayfield, would sit down, talk about Baylor sports, but also try and have on some fun guests and bring some experiences to light that aren't necessarily the forefront of Baylor athletics. We always hear about basketball and football, and you don't really hear as much about the smaller sports such as softball, who's having a great season, or acrobatics and tumbling. So our goal is to inform the Baylor students of smaller sports, the fun stuff, of course, with the bigger sports, as well as some of the recreational sports on campus for students to just participate in. So we've decided that in the future we would like to participate in one of those teams and kind of pump that up, and maybe that could become its own thing. But right now, Don't Feed the Bears is Baylor sports and as close to home as it can get.
So for the guests that you bring onto the show, is it only athletes, or who do you bring onto the show?
So we've been trying to get a few athletes on the show, and so far no success, but we've been able to bring on other people in the newsroom who work for the Baylor Lariat, and they've been able to bring their own aspect. I'm a specialist in baseball, basketball, football, and tennis right now, but it's fun to bring on someone who was exclusively focused on volleyball, and then we can get a deep dive into them, start the conversation, and for the ideas that Harper and I may have, it's great to have a third person who can build upon that, because then we're on our toes a little bit. We know what to expect from each other, whether we're playing around or, honestly, there's some times where it's just hard to get through the show because there's not enough news and Baylor's struggling a lot. So to add someone in, it's a wild card, and you're staying on your feet trying to figure out what works best. So it's exciting to bring those people in, and we will have former Baylor athletes as well as former alums on the show in the future to just kind of see where they're at right now and kind of tell some feature stories on air.
That's some exciting stuff, Foster. Between writing for the Baylor Lariat and the podcast, do you have a preference? Do you enjoy one more than the other?
Right now, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I like writing.
Really?
I love the podcasting, but I'm missing an aspect that I really want to go into, which is just live. So I'd love to do a live radio talk show where it's not just me and the other person talking, but we got a text line, we've got breaking news, we're covering stuff on the spot. So I think moving forward, I'd like to get more to a point where I can do live radio. I can do live broadcasts of games, doing play-by-play or color commentary. But right now, I'm shocked that I'm saying it's sports writing that's kind of tied me in. I've bit the bullet right there, and I'm all for it.
My final question for you, Foster. What direction do you want to take your career? Like, what is your most ideal job?
Most ideal job. I think right now I'm really zoning towards doing play-by-play for a minor league baseball team when I graduate, and then hopefully pushing that forward to an ESPN job or something, doing play-by-play and then also tossed on as a radio on-air commentary guy. And whether that's at the dusk midnight to 3 slot, I don't care. I'll stay up the late nights. I just like to get some more experience and do stuff like that. That's the goal.
I wish you the best of luck, Foster. It was a pleasure having you on our podcast. Please tune in next week for the next episode of The Last Call. Thank you.